Nature depends on water. Without it, nature can no longer exist.
How much drought can our ecosystem and waters withstand if the climate changes over a relatively short time?
When it comes to climate change, we are only now just beginning to feel the effects.
Ecosystems are already collapsing globally.
Now we also have to worry about the worst of all possible endings.
About 80% of the trees have died, and nothing can be done.
Here we have a 300% overuse of water.
I'm literally sitting on what was a boat ramp.
We're having such an impact that we could kill the Colorado River.
It's a difficult balancing act. No one can be without drinking water from the tap.
We are certainly headed for a grave hydrological catastrophe.
You could say that a violent confrontation with nature awaits us.
We're used to an abundance of water. But that perception is changing quickly, thanks to climate change. Less water is leading to frequent water shortages. This series raises the question, what happens when the wells run dry? The Taunus Mountains provide most of the drinking water in Germany's Rhine-Main region. Ernst Kluge is the former head of Wiesbaden's water authority. And ecologist Andreas Sundermann has studied the impact of extracting water from the Taunus Mountains on the local nature. All over Germany, the consequences of the drought are visible.
As you can see, I'm walking dry-footed through what used to be a stream that carried water all year round.
I'm literally standing on this riverbed, and you can see the gravel underneath these leaves.
It's sad to see the stream like this. It just confirms what we have known for a long time, that water extraction interferes with the ecology, with groundwater levels, and also drains the landscape.
So why are rivers and streams drying up? We look for clues in a particularly hard-hit region, water-rich Bavaria. Simon Preiss from the Nuremberg Water Management Office searches for a pond that is a tributary to the Pegnitz River.
You have to imagine that only a few years ago, this was all underwater.
But there's nothing here.
Where did the water come from? And where did it go? The two experts are looking for the remnants of a spring.
You can see that the water level used to reach above this platform.
Right.
Incredible. Nature reacts relatively quickly to rainfall, just like when you water your flowers in a pot. But what we're talking about here is how it looks underneath the surface. Through our official monitoring systems, we can see that in recent years, the levels have not recovered during the winter like they used to. And that's a big concern.
Water used to flow from here and fill this pond. Now the water table that's in the mountain behind us is even below this edge, where the water used to gush out. This area where the water used to flow through is completely dry, as you can see. I have some images from earlier this year where you can still see some water here. Now it's basically just a dried out cave.
The situation has never been as critical as in the last years because of the consecutive dry summers and springs we've had.
Where does our groundwater come from? At the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Fred Hattemann analyzes the German Weather Service's records of precipitation and evaporation. How is the available water, the water supply, changing?
This corridor between precipitation and evaporation is what later becomes groundwater and flows into the rivers. That's the water we can manage. But we are seeing this corridor getting narrower. The annual average of rainfall may remain unchanged, yet we have less water. That's because our winters are getting shorter. Warmer weather means more evaporation, causing vegetation to grow for longer periods. And winter is when the water tables and reservoirs are replenished, in the phase where we don't have green vegetation. However, that phase is getting shorter, meaning that the same amount of rain eventually leads to less water for humans and nature.
Over the past 50 years, global animal populations have declined by an average of 68%. And even though humans only make up 0.01% of Earth's biomass, we are responsible for almost all the negative impacts on everything else. The Senckenberg Institute in Frankfurt am Main has been researching biodiversity since 1817. What is the correlation between biodiversity and a drier climate?
What we've been able to show in our global study is that streams and rivers drying up at the surface have become the rule, not the exception. 60% of all streams and rivers naturally go dry. But when a stream that permanently carries water begins to dry up, there are obviously massive consequences, both for the environment and for the availability and for the quality of the water for us humans.
The consequences are becoming apparent in Germany's Rhine-Main region. A large part of the drinking water for the 5.8 million people living here comes from the Taunus Mountains. For more than a century, millions of cubic meters of water have been pumped out of the ground every year. How does this plant, operated by Hessenwasser, one of the largest water suppliers in the region, affect nature? Ernst Kluge is the former head of the Water Authority in Wiesbaden, one of the largest population centers in the region. For years, Kluge has documented the consequences of extracting drinking water on nature.
Hinter mir ist ein Gewässerarm des Schwarzbachs.
Behind me is an arm of the Schwarzbach River that has gone dry. It's dry throughout the year due to the water extraction that is located here above us, the large Munzbergstollen. The consequences for nature are serious. It has gotten progressively worse because of the drought in the last few years.
Noch zugenommen hat, die Situation hat sich noch sehr verschärft.
One of Hessenwasser's customers is the city of Oberursel, near Frankfurt. Oberursel's public utility supplies residents with drinking water. Managing Director Julia Antoni and Technical Manager Dieter Gredisch explain where the water comes from.
Das Gewinnungsgebiet im Hochtaunus kann man sich vorstellen wie eine Badewanne.
Picture the extraction area in the Taunus Mountains as a bathtub, and we're extracting water from this bathtub. But the Taunus also has an outflow. That's the Urselbach River. And the flow of the Urselbach has to be at a certain level for us to be able to use our water rights in the Taunus.
The Urselbach River flows through the entire region, and drinking water can't be taken out unless the Urselbach is carrying water. Andreas Sundermann from the Senckenberg Institute has been observing the river for years.
Also, wir sind hier an der Stelle vom Urselbach, die im Sommer tatsächlich trocken fällt.
We're standing at the point of the Urselbach that actually dries up during the summer months. It's easier to imagine if you look at some pictures. This, for example, is the view downstream. And you can see that this channel, this gravel bed, is completely dry. And that's because drinking water is being extracted from the upper reaches of the Urselbach. And the water that's extracted there is what is missing here.
Water for citizens or water for the river? It's a tough choice. And what are the consequences for the entire Rhine-Main region, which gets much of its drinking water from the Taunus? Competition for water as a resource has already become a fact. And here, in the heart of Germany, the demand for human drinking water is competing directly with nature's needs. Not only is plant life affected, aquatic life is hurting too.
This also has an impact on the biodiversity. We are lacking certain species normally found here because they can't cope with the reduced flow of water.
Our streams and rivers are among the most biodiverse habitats in the world, easily comparable to coral reefs or tropical rainforests. Only this diversity is underwater and not immediately visible.
Andrea Sundermann is doing field work by the Urselbach River. She's collecting samples at several locations to document the current biodiversity and for closer examination in the laboratory.
In Germany, only 7% of all streams and rivers are considered to be in good ecological condition, which means that 93% of water bodies are in poor condition. And this, despite the European Water Framework Directive. The directive's goal is to achieve a good ecological status for all water bodies by 2027. And we are now at just 7%. That means that it's impossible to achieve this target. Which begs the question, why do we formulate targets that we know from the outset are out of reach with our current efforts?
What will Sundermann find in today's samples?
There should be more. Not necessarily more individuals, but more species. Overall, there are several types of mayflies, caddisflies and beetles missing. So in that sense, we really have a reduced species diversity here. Normally, there are many, many more species in a body of water like this.
What are the consequences of such reduced species diversity for nature?
Der Rückgang der biologischen Vielfalt. The decline of biodiversity is the biggest challenge we face as humanity. On the one hand, once something is lost, it's lost forever. And on the other hand, we don't know what a 10, 20, or 50% decline in this diversity will mean for nature, and ultimately for us in the long run.
But human impact on our waters is not limited to just extracting drinking water.
What we are seeing here is the runoff from the Oberursel wastewater treatment plant. It's actually purified wastewater. Downstream of this plant, we have a relatively high percentage of purified wastewater in the river. So we have a very reduced species composition there. Only a few species can cope.
Purified water sounds harmless, but it contains toxic residues, from microplastics to pharmaceuticals and pesticides, discharged into our streams and rivers. Scientists in Hanover, the capital of Lower Saxony, are currently investigating the impact on groundwater. This is where Ralf Hille's team comes in. Hanover's environmental agency has been taking a hard look at groundwater over a long period of time.
Since our drinking water is mainly fed by groundwater, any adverse effect on the groundwater will eventually also affect our drinking water.
The researchers first collect a water sample. They use fishing line to lower the receptacle 20 meters into the monitoring point and then fill it up with groundwater.
The water will be chemically analysed and is captured in this tube. We lower it down to the bottom of this groundwater. Now that we've collected the water, we can begin the chemical examination.
The groundwater will first be screened for residues in the laboratory, and then experts will look for living organisms.
We have recently been using more scientific methods, which allows us to look for different kinds of microorganisms.
If they were to find species that would normally only be found on the surface, it would be evidence of surface water mixing with groundwater. The underwater camera sinks deeper and deeper into the groundwater monitoring point, looking for microorganisms. But a more detailed examination is necessary. The water samples from Hanover have been sent to the University of Koblenz-Landau for analysis. Water ecologist Hans-Jürgen Hahn and his team will take a microscopic look at the samples.
This one is quite interesting.
The scientist's suspicion is confirmed when a small, almost transparent creature appears under the lens.
These sea shrimps are always an indication of surface water infiltration. This sample also contains freshwater copepods, which are typical organisms found on the surface. If you find those in samples from groundwater or drinking water reservoirs, you know that something is coming in from above.
But are these findings really cause for concern yet? And if so, why?
The water that is seeping out is neither drinking water nor fresh water from the spring. To a great extent, it's wastewater from treatment plants. In the Rhine River, it is about 50%, 80% in the Neckar River, and sometimes close to 100% in smaller streams. Wastewater flowing in streams and seeping into groundwater obviously poses a risk to quality.
Testing the chemical composition of the water samples from Hanover led to some equally disturbing findings.
Infiltration by unwanted substances can also be found in the locations in Hanover affected or influenced by surface water, pharmaceuticals for example. So far the concentration is very low, but detectable nevertheless. We're assuming this will get worse in the coming years and decades. An American study from earlier this year showed that a considerable part of the waters, especially in the West, had been contaminated. There are many pollutants, and the situation is most critical in areas where surface irrigation is used for agriculture.
A renowned hydrologist explains the impact on America's West Coast.
I'm Jay Famiglietti. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Institute for Water Security at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm a hydrologist. I haven't been down there in a while, and to see how things have changed, how things have dried out since I left California in 2018, really incredible.
Nowhere is the impact of wastewater on nature more evident than in the Imperial Irrigation District, one of the largest agricultural areas in North America. It's man-made and in the middle of a desert.
You really need to get out into these agricultural regions to really understand their vast expanse. That's true in the Central Valley. It's true in the Imperial Irrigation District. You get out there and these fields just stretch and stretch and stretch for miles and miles. And that's when you realize just how much water is being spread over the surface to green up the desert.
The Imperial Irrigation District spreads 3.7 trillion liters of water per year in the region. Meanwhile, 40 million local people face water shortages, and nature is drying up.
The runoff from all the agricultural fields gets channeled into rivers and and is delivered to the Salton Sea, which is internally draining, which means that's it. It's like the Dead Sea. The runoff that goes into is full of fertilizer and pesticides, so the water itself is toxic. I don't actually know if it can be saved. I don't know what it would take to save it.
The Salton Sea is the largest freshwater lake in California. It used to be a vacation resort. Today, very little can live here anymore.
I'm literally sitting on what was a boat ramp.
The lake is seeping away and evaporating.
The Salton Sea has been a tragedy. As the waters have receded, it's created dust that blows into as far as the city of Los Angeles, creating air quality issues to begin with. And then there is the increased salinity of the water. So you've got a number of tragic issues that have arisen where there were once parks and recreation facilities. They're now barren beachlands at best. I remember when I first came to the Salton Sea a few years ago, the water levels were literally thousands of feet closer than they are today. And it just is a startling thing to see.
Humans have consumed the water for farming in the desert, while poisoning the water that nature needs to survive. In the long run, the consequence of this dying nature will be a loss of human habitat.
The timescales at which we're talking about here, these are decadal scale timescales, right? This didn't just happen in a few years. This is the culmination of decades of disregard for the environment. So this is where we're going to end up in more and more places around the world, and I think our decision makers need to see this, and they need to understand how we got to this point.
Our competition with nature for water is a battle for human existence. The fight has already been lost in parts of America's west coast. Northern Europe is doing comparably better. But here too, the warning signs have been ignored. If the same mistakes are not prevented, it will affect everyone.
How much drought can our ecosystem, which is more used to moisture and water bodies, tolerate if the climate changes over a relatively short period of time? What happens to the fauna and flora, to animal and plant life? We can already observe some implications in certain forests where there are widespread die-offs. Such scenarios are warning signs, showing that dramatic changes are happening to nature.
What are the consequences of drought in Germany's forests? The bark beetle has killed trees affected by the dry conditions, destroying large parts of the tree population. To make matters worse, a new disease now threatens woodlands.
Wow. Wow, this one looks as if someone had torched it.
Yeah.
Klaus Atzet accompanies Nicole Bergdorf from the Bavarian State Institute of Forestry into a forest where the sooty bark disease is swiftly killing native maples.
The spread of the disease increased alongside the extreme heat and drought of 2018 and 2019. The fungus enters the wood through broken branches or wounds, grows into the wood, and then spreads through the tree, especially in dry conditions. When the fungus reaches the bark, these spore deposits are formed, which you can see here. These contain 170 million spores per square centimetre and are then released into the air.
Incredible. Just incredible.
And it's not just affecting individual trees. In this survey area, about 80% of the trees have developed the sooty bark disease, and nearly all have died. And nothing can be done.
Sooty bark disease. Unstoppable. Devastating, both for nature and humans. Because once the fungal spores form on the bark, they can also infect people's lungs and become life-threatening. To show how the disease spreads, scientists cut down an infected tree where no spores have yet formed.
This is a tragedy, because the population is simply collapsing. Not in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that a fungus could have such a massive impact and cause such widespread damage.
The findings also come as a surprise to Klaus Atzet and Professor Martin Grambo, a longtime member of Germany's Working Group on Water.
Da passiert etwas, das ist maximal beunruhigend.
What is happening is incredibly disturbing. This is a typical tipping point. That is, once the forest is so damaged that it dies, the whole system changes.
Dass abstirbt, dann verändert sich das gesamte System.
Less water is extracted from the air, and everything becomes much drier when the forest is gone. Then you are on your way to desertification. If we use a human analogy, you can get sick, but if you recover, everything is fine. But once you're dead, you're dead. And that is, so to speak, the meaning of a tipping point. Something has changed that is irreversible.
Das kriegen wir nicht mehr zurück.
The Technical University of Munich uses high-tech equipment to objectively track the effects in regions with progressive water scarcity, even below the Earth's surface, like here in Lower Franconia.
Das ist hier einer von 2 Messstandorten, wo wir von der TU München die
This is one of 2 observation points where we measure soil moisture in different layers. As you can see, we have dug a hole that is almost 2 meters deep. We then regularly install sensors, and this helps us to get a more complete picture of the soil moisture.
During the winter months, the soil should be very moist. But the team of scientists are shocked when taking a closer look at the upper layers.
It's bone dry. Really unbelievable. The forest soil is maybe rooted 50 centimeters below the surface. Further down, there's a transition to the mineralized part. But that seems quite dry. There are still some roots down there too, but there's not much evidence of any water or moisture.
It's not an isolated case. The lack of water is already a fact in Germany's forests.
It's important for us in the Environment Ministry to look at how the precipitation is spread throughout the different areas and environments. That is, how much arrives and where.
The rising temperatures mean trees and plants need more and more water. But their roots are also reaching deeper into the ground in search of the diminishing water supply. And that has a direct impact on our human habitats. The falling water levels can also cause massive damage to buildings. In and around Hanover, the effects are becoming apparent. Like in this old upscale neighborhood.
You can already see the first signs of subsidence. This terrace is only 3 or 4 years old, but we're already seeing cracks. Only the shaft remains in place because its foundations are very deep.
Jens Knollmann shows the damage in the walls of his parents' house to building surveyor Jens Roman.
The soil below is clay, and presumably this combination of a change in water balance and growing vegetation is shrinking the soil and creating damages because of subsidence. Even though the house has been standing here for 40 years or more, suddenly a whole wall is sinking into the ground.
Ja, komplett eine Hauswand nach unten sackt.
The cracks are a threat to the overall structural integrity of the building. The damage is even more apparent in the basement.
Wenn es trockene Perioden gibt, in Sommern, die wir jetzt in den letzten Jahren hatten, wird dieses Wasser halt
During dry spells like the recent summers, the roots reach deeper and deeper under the foundations, like in this cellar, sucking all the water from the soil and causing it to shrink. According to lab tests, the soil volume has decreased by up to almost 50%. These are artificial levels that are generated with tests, but they show that if the soil shrinks by as little as 10%, the damage will be clearly visible through cracks in the building.
This is the exact spot we could see from the outside. You could basically fit your hand in there.
Sinking groundwater. Even our homes are at risk.
It's just pushing out like this.
Exactly. The whole house is sagging here, sinking into the ground. And here you can see how the wall is completely cracked open. You wouldn't expect lack of water to be a problem in Germany, but I think several factors are combining and causing this type of subsidence damage, particularly in the dry summers.
Hier mit diesen Setzungsschäden durch trockene Sommer, in denen das dann besonders auftritt. Das ist schon, dieses Haus will ich eigentlich erhalten. Das haben meine Eltern gebaut.
I want to preserve this house. My parents built it and my father actually drew up the floor plans. That's why we're going to make an investment shoring up this wall to keep it standing for the next 50 years.
Und das versuchen, dass es noch die nächsten 50 Jahre steht.
Subsidence due to sinking groundwater may still be a relatively unknown phenomenon in Germany, but in the affluent neighborhoods of Mexico City, excessive water use is commonplace, even though subsidence damage is equally commonplace in this metropolis of 20 million. Jacobo Espinosa of the city's water authority is responsible for recording the damage, but he can't keep up.
Here you can see the cracks caused by the subsidence of the bridge. One part of the bridge is stable, and the other is sinking. It stops here. It sinks some 30 centimeters each year.
Graves are being swallowed by the ground in the cemetery in the historic Old Town.
From here to the corner, you can clearly see the difference. It's almost 2.5 meters. It's massive.
First cracks, then subsidence, all over the city.
We didn't know why the ground was sinking. But then we were told that it was because of the excessive use of groundwater in this area.
Mexico City consumes tremendous amounts of water. And scientist Luis Zambrano researches the megalopolis's water consumption.
It's a challenge, an enormous challenge. To supply water to Mexico City, a city of 20 million people, is a difficult task.
Mexico City was built where there used to be lakes, and most of the city's drinking water comes from the ground.
Until 10 years ago, we knew very little about the amount of water in the aquifers, and we still don't know for certain, since there is very little public information about this. What we do know is that more and more water is being extracted by drilling deeper and deeper.
Despite officials not really knowing how much water the region actually has, here in Valle de Mexico, the public waterworks keep pumping up water to somehow meet the enormous demand.
In the basin of the Valle de Mexico, there is a 300% overuse of water. That is, the difference between what's available, for example underground, and what we are pumping out. We're using 3 times more water than is being recreated. The aquifers will never be replenished.
How long can that be sustained? Increasing subsidence of the ground may only be a precursor to what will come.
And here, you can see subsidence that has occurred in recent years due to the excessive water use. There are hundreds of wells here, drawing water day and night.
The Chalco neighborhood in the middle of the country's capital has become uninhabitable.
Esto que es de origen volcánico no se hunde.
This part, that is volcanic soil, doesn't sink because it's pure rock. And this is where the clay soil starts. In what used to be the Lake of Chalco, over hundreds or thousands of years, it accumulated clay, and this soil is now shrinking. When you overuse an aquifer, you leave a hole in the ground. The pressure of the soil itself and the weight of the buildings then cause the ground to sink. That's why we have subsidence of 30 centimeters per year here, and up to 40 centimeters per year in parts of the lake down there. So here, where we are now, we already have subsidence of up to 15 meters compared to previous years. That's where we're at. The neighborhoods below Chalco, Valle de Chalco and Ixtapaluca, also have more or less the subsidence. But here it is most obvious.
30 to 40 centimeters is a lot. It's something like this, annually. And what we're seeing in the center of the city, you can see for yourself if you stand down by the Angel of Independence. There are new steps, and only the darker steps are original. All the others are new. The reason is that Mexico City is sinking because of its water extraction.
By the city's famous Angel of Independence landmark, the new steps highlight the sinking street level. Millions of people are already directly affected by the consequences of the subsidence, as underground water pipes burst and break under the weight of the city. In some neighborhoods, water no longer comes out of the tap, turning it into a costly commodity. This family has been waiting half a day for the delivery of their pipa, the local water truck.
We've been here since 9 this morning, waiting for the tanker to arrive.
Private roof water tanks can be seen everywhere.
Many people are without water and their numbers are growing, not only on our street.
And the whole city is dry.
Thousands of mostly private water trucks drive through the streets day and night, selling to those who can afford it. Subsidence is endangering homes, and destroyed pipes are disrupting the city's drinking water supply.
I've been to many meetings at the mayor's office. It showed me very clearly that the government is not doing anything for us here. It's getting worse everywhere. It's not just this municipality that is lacking water. They send a tanker or two here and there, but to supply a whole town like that, well, it's crazy.
I've been without running water for 2 years. The tanker only comes by once a week. A while ago, the neighbors teamed up to pay for extra water deliveries from a private company. In the beginning, the delivery cost 800 pesos. Now it's between 1,350 and 1,400 pesos. So it's almost doubled, and we can't afford it anymore.
The people of Mexico City have to help themselves. But the overuse of groundwater in the middle of one of the most active earthquake zones in the world poses an even greater threat.
When aquifers dry up, the ground has less stability. And then, when there is an earthquake, it can be much stronger, much more violent than what we might expect if the aquifer would be more or less full.
What the continued overuse of the city's groundwater resources could mean for the millions of people is only just beginning to show. Like everywhere in nature, one thing is clear. Everything is connected.
The hydrological catastrophe we are undoubtedly heading for will be a huge struggle. We should immediately begin to steer everything towards sustainability. It's not being talked about, but we need immediate political action. If we do nothing, we will have massive problems.
Although it's still not too late to halt the devastating climate crisis, we continue to destroy natural wonders for our water extraction, like here in the US, where the mighty Colorado River flows through the Grand Canyon.
We're having such an impact that we could kill the Colorado River and end this downcutting that's been going on for 70 million years very naturally. We could end it. This is not politics. This is just opening our eyes. We're observing what's out here. We're doing this, and we need to be accountable for it.
These are the images that show our responsibility towards nature and future generations.
This era is called the Anthropocene, and it is recording the widespread disregard for the environment, the massive injection of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, other dangerous gases into the atmosphere. And whoever is around, whether it's humans or something else, in a couple of million years, when they look back, they're going to ask the question, what the heck were these people thinking? Did they wipe themselves out? Maybe they're going to think that their brains, that our brains, weren't as evolved as they should be, because obviously we are in a pathway, on a trajectory for self-destruction.